Jaden's murder was the most infamous flashpoint of the Beaumont-Mali feud, but it was far from the only one. The streets of Leighton and Walthamstow saw tit-for-tat attacks as each side retaliated for the last offence. In one incident, a young Bowmont crew member was stabbed outside a chicken shop. In another, Marley Boys assailants on mopeds chased a rival through back alleys with knives drawn. Much of this violence played out below the media radar, considered just gang-on-gang crime. But innocents were caught in the crossfire too. In March 2018, around the same time the feud was escalating, 20-year-old Joseph Williams Torres was sitting in a van in Walthamstow when he was shot dead in a case of mistaken identity. He wasn't in a gang at all, just a local young man in the wrong place. His killers were later linked to the Marley Boys, apparently out hunting for rivals that night. Joseph's death underscored the toll this turf war took on the wider community. Anyone could become collateral damage. Mothers in these neighborhoods started warning their sons to be home before dark. Murals and street memorials with flowers and candles appeared on street corners, heartbreaking testaments to teenage lives lost. The feud also exposed the disturbing tactics both gangs used to groom and exploit youths. Older gang members, sometimes not even that old themselves, maybe early 20s, would present themselves as big brothers or protectors to kids. They hung around school gates, arcades, and estates, scouting for recruits. A typical grooming scenario might start with something innocuous, buying a 13-year-old new trainers or meals, giving him a sense of belonging. Next comes an easy job: just hold on to this package for me, or stand lookout and I'll give you $50. Before long, that kid is riding the train to a far-off seaside town with a phone and a list of addict clients, carrying a stash of crack cocaine in his backpack. By the time parents notice their child is skipping school or coming home with unexplained cash, the gang's hooks are in deep. Threats follow. If you try to back out, we know where your family lives. It's a blend of flattery, coercion, and terror that proves devastatingly effective in drawing youths into crime. According to one youth worker, many of these kids don't even see themselves as victims because the gang lifestyle is sold to them as a glamorous hustle. They're told that "let's get rich" is the ultimate goal, and that together they'll rise out of poverty. But in reality, the vast majority of these groomed youths end up either in prison, in the hospital, or dead before they see any real riches. For the law-abiding residents of Leighton and surrounding areas, the Beaumont crew versus Marley Boys conflict turned daily life into a gauntlet of fear. Many locals felt like hostages in their own neighborhood. Parents kept children indoors, and teens who wanted no part of gangs still had to navigate the minefield of gang territories. Wearing the wrong color or walking down the wrong street could provoke a confrontation. In some areas, youth clubs and libraries became refuges where kids could feel safe from recruitment or attack. But even those were occasionally stalked by older gang members on the lookout. The community also banded together to push back. Churches, youth organizations, and residents' groups started peace marches and held vigils for victims. They set up anonymous tip lines and campaigned for more police presence. In a symbolic move, knife amnesty bins were installed at local community centers, big metal containers where anyone could drop off a blade, no questions asked. Close-up of a knife bin overflowing with turned-in knives and machetes. These bins filled up regularly, a stark indicator of how many weapons were circulating on the streets. Yet even as dozens of knives were surrendered, many residents knew hundreds more remained out there. The trauma in the community was real. Elementary school children walked past crime scene tape on their way to school. Families mourned sons lost both to violence and to prison cells. The Metropolitan Police faced a daunting challenge in quelling this gang war. Waltham Forest became a focal point for the Met's gang unit and Operation Trident, the special unit for gun crime, as violence spiked. Officers carried out dawn raids on suspected gang members' homes, seizing drugs, weapons, and phones. They used gang injunctions, court orders, to ban known LGR and Marley Boys members from associating with each other or even entering certain areas. In some cases, youth workers accompanied police to try to coax kids away from gang life at the moment of arrest. But the gangs proved resourceful and highly organized. They learned to evade surveillance by ditching flashy smartphones and using old-school burner phones, basic Nokias that are harder to monitor. They often avoided the social media bravado that got other gangs caught, operating in the shadows instead. In fact, the Marley Boys in particular were known to shun posting on YouTube or Snapchat about their exploits, which made gathering intelligence on them tougher. Police even found evidence that gang members were tracking the police, recording undercover officers' license plates and researching their personal details to intimidate law enforcement. It was a cat-and-mouse game, with gangs adapting quickly to every police tactic. Throughout 2018 and 2019, several major police operations targeted the county lines linked to these gangs. Large-scale investigations led to multiple convictions. In one success, 5 Marley Boys members were convicted in 2021 for running Class A drugs to Essex, disrupting one of their lucrative county lines. The Beaumont crew's hierarchy also took hits, with a number of senior figures taken off the streets for drug trafficking, weapons charges, or conspiracy offenses. Often these didn't make headlines. They were the quiet removals of mid-level gangsters that cumulatively weakened the group. By 2020, local authorities also embraced a public health approach to the gang problem, investing in youth outreach, mentoring programs for at-risk kids, and job training, trying to drain the talent pool that gangs like LGR and Mali drew from. It was clear that pure enforcement wasn't enough. The community had to be part of the solution. Runs. It's just past midnight on a quiet estate in Leighton, East London. Under the sickly glow of streetlights, a grainy CCTV camera records a scene of sudden violence. A scooter skids sideways as a car rams it at full speed. Figures in dark hoodies leap out and set upon the fallen rider with knives flashing. The 14-year-old victim, bleeding on the asphalt, is named Jaden Moody, a schoolboy caught up in a brutal feud. His murder that night in January 2019 would shock Britain. It was no random attack, but a targeted hit in a gang war between 2 of East London's most notorious crews. The Bowmont crew, also known as LGR, Let's Get Rich, and their rivals, the Marley Boys. To understand how we got here, we travel back to the late 1990s. The backdrop is the Beaumont Road estate in Leighton, a warren of concrete housing blocks that became infamous as a cradle of gang culture. Here, a group of local youths coalesced into what became known as the Beaumont Crew. By the 2000s, the Beaumont Crew was the longest established gang in Waltham Forest, with an estimated 100 members ranging from their early teens to mid-30s. They controlled local drug dealing and built a reputation on the street as a force to be reckoned with. Early studies of London gangs even identified Bowmont as one of the dominant players in the borough. The crew formed alliances beyond their home turf, looking to expand their criminal enterprise beyond just one postcode. Back then, it was all about territory, repping your block. The Beaumont crew had the sprawling Beaumont estate as their stronghold, and they fiercely defended it against any incursion. But nothing in London stays static. Over the years, turf lines shifted and alliances churned. Neighbouring gangs clashed with Bowmont. An old incident from the early 2000s is still remembered locally, when members of the Oliver Close gang robbed a Beaumont crew drug dealer, sparking a bitter dispute. At one point, smaller rival crews like the Boundary Boys and Cathal crew teamed up to challenge Beaumont's dominance and take over the drug trade in the area. The street landscape was constantly in flux, with gangs splintering, merging, and vying for control of estates and corners. Through it all, the Beaumont crew endured, evolving from a neighborhood gang into a leaner, more profit-driven operation. The 2010s, the old Beaumont estate itself was undergoing drastic changes. Tower blocks that once housed generations of working-class families and provided cover for gang activity were demolished and redeveloped. Shiny new apartment buildings rose in their place, some sold to private owners, breaking up the estate's traditional community. If you go down there, no one's there now. Everyone's moved off, a local resident remarked, noting that the people living on Bowmont now are not gang members. This regeneration disrupted the Beaumont crew's home base. Half the people who say they're from Bowmont don't even live there anymore. Yet the gang didn't disappear, it adapted. Freed from the physical confines of the estate, the Beaumont crew began to operate in a more dispersed way, and their ethos shifted. They adopted the moniker LGR, Let's Get Rich, a motto that signaled a new focus on money and enterprise over postcode pride. For these young men, many of them from impoverished backgrounds, the lure of fast cash was a stronger motivator than old-school turf loyalty. LGR became both their identity and their mission statement. Drug dealing was the golden ticket, and the crew pursued it with a ruthless entrepreneurial zeal. They started to resemble an organized crime outfit as much as a street gang, with older members acting like shadowy CEOs and teenage youngers as their foot soldiers. By this time, Leighton's E10 postcode, once firmly Bowmont territory, had become a contested marketplace. A new faction was rising from within their ranks, younger, hungrier, and even more ruthless. Around 2015, a splinter group broke away from the Beaumont crew, forming their own outfit that would soon terrorize East London, the Marley Boys. Initially, many of the Marley Boys were in fact former Beaumont crew members or protégés, hence locals sometimes calling them the Beaumont Boys in early days. But this wasn't just a rebrand, it was a full-blown mutiny. The Marley Boys had a different vision. They embraced the new school gang mentality, economically driven, businesslike, and secretive. They cared less about postcode beef for its own sake, and more about expanding drug markets and making money, unless territory was directly tied to those profits. The name Mali nods to the Somalian heritage of many of its OGs, though the gang quickly became ethnically diverse. Waltham Forest's gang landscape was now transformed. The Marley Boys rapidly rose to become the most dominant gang in the borough, and the Beaumont crew, now tagged as LGR, found itself facing a deadly rival for power. The heart of this conflict was still Leighton. Postcode E10, covering Leighton and nearby E17 in Walthamstow, became battlegrounds. The Beaumont crew had its roots in E10, while the Marley Boys spread from Leighton into Walthamstow and beyond. They vied for control of housing estates, street corners, and stash houses, wherever they could sell drugs. The old Beaumont estate might have been rebuilt and gentrified, but other corners of Leighton provided fertile ground for gang activity. Run-down tower blocks, back alleys, chicken shops, and youth clubs turned into recruiting grounds and occasional war zones. The Marley Boys didn't hesitate to push into Beaumont LGR turf, and vice versa. Each side began staking claim not just to streets, but to drug supply lines that stretched far outside London. Both gangs quickly realized the real money wasn't in just hanging around the estate, selling $10 bags to locals. It was in the county lines drug trade. This means running heroin, crack, and cocaine from big city suppliers into smaller towns and rural areas, using dedicated phone lines and young runners. The payoff was huge. At their peak, a crew like the Marley Boys could rake in up to $50,000 a week from narcotics sales. The Beaumont crew, under the Let's Get Rich banner, wanted their cut of that action. They set up their own county lines, competing fiercely for territory and clients. Addicts in places as far as Essex and Norfolk started receiving doorstep deliveries of London-sourced drugs. In one case, police later busted a ring of Marley Boys members ferrying crack and heroin into Essex market towns, a glimpse into the lucrative pipeline that both Marley and LGR were operating. Running these drug lines required manpower. Kids, some as young as 12 or 13, became the pawns in this operation. Older gang members would groom vulnerable youths from local schools or troubled homes, recruiting them with promises of designer clothes, cash, and a sense of belonging. These teenagers would then be sent out of London on dangerous missions, staying in strangers' homes, so-called trap houses, cutting and bagging drugs, and selling on street corners far from their own neighborhoods. Many were effectively trafficked, ferried to distant towns to work long hours dealing, all while under threat of violence if they messed up. As one official report noted, young people have been recruited and used as drug runners, sometimes leaving the London area for cross-county lines drug dealing, organized and paid for by the Marley Boys elders. The younger members, 12-17 in both gangs, were increasingly active in serious crime, both as perpetrators and victims, often carrying knives and occasionally firearms as they defended their patch or robbed rivals. With so much at stake, money, reputation, and territory, it was inevitable that violence would explode between the Beaumont crew, LGR, and the upstart Marley Boys. The feud turned East London neighborhoods into a tinderbox. Stabbings, shootings, and beatings started to punctuate the struggle for dominance. Both gangs armed themselves with knives and machetes as weapons of choice, but guns sometimes came into play too. According to police and community reports, the Marley Boys quickly earned a name as the most business-driven, violent, and ruthless gang around, and the Beaumont crew was one of their chief rivals. One particularly shocking episode of this war was the murder of Jaden Moody, mentioned earlier. Jaden was just 14, but he had been lured into working for the Beaumont crew, LGR, allegedly running drugs for them on a scooter the night he died. In the eyes of the Marley Boys who attacked him, Jaden was competition, an enemy courier. After ramming him off the road, a group of Marley Boys stabbed him 9 times on the pavement, killing him on the spot. The sheer brutality of murdering a child in cold blood sent shockwaves through the community. It later came out in court that one of the attackers, 19-year-old Ayub Majduleen, had previously been flagged as a victim of child grooming himself, identified by social services as a potential modern slavery case. This grim irony, a victim turned perpetrator, highlights how deeply the cycle of exploitation runs. As we move into the mid-2020s, the Beaumont crew, LGR, is not the force it once was. Deprived of their geographic heartland and pounded by years of crackdowns, the gang has fragmented. Some older members aged out of street life, a few lucky ones transitioned into semi-legitimate jobs, or simply lay low to avoid further trouble. Others were absorbed into bigger criminal networks. It's rumored that some Beaumont crew alumni now work directly for larger drug supply rings outside London, essentially becoming businessmen in the narcotics trade. The younger generation of Beaumont-affiliated youth either fell victim to the violence, got arrested, or in some cases defected to the Marley Boys or other emerging crews for protection. The LGR brand still exists in whispers, scrawled as graffiti tags on alley walls or muttered in certain music lyrics. But as a cohesive gang, LGR's presence in Leighton has dwindled. Meanwhile, the Marley Boys consolidated much of the area's drug trade under their franchise. They had subsumed some smaller gangs, like the Drive Crew and Boundary Boys alliances mentioned in local reports, into their operation. Yet they too paid a price. Many of their top leaders are now either dead or serving long prison terms. The feared Marley Boys general, who orchestrated multiple murders, was sentenced to at least 36 years in prison in 2023. These successes give some hope that the worst of the blood feud has passed. But on the flip side, the power vacuum could lead to new violence as remaining members fight over the spoils. East London's gang map is ever-changing. Today's LGR and Marley Boys could morph into tomorrow's new gangs with different names, but the underlying issues remain. The story of the Beaumont crew and Marley Boys has also seeped into the broader culture of UK youth and music. London's drill music scene, a raw offshoot of hip-hop that often chronicles gang life, has been both a reflection of and an influence on this gang war. The Marley Boys in particular cultivated a presence in drill under the name MaliStrip, with several of their members becoming rappers who gained notoriety online. In music videos, masked young men from East London boast about getting money and avenging fallen friends, sometimes alluding to real events in coded language. Tracks by artists affiliated with MaliStrip rack up hundreds of thousands of views, blurring the line between entertainment and reality. According to Vice, the MaliStrip collective even helped shine a spotlight on Britain's Somali youth in the drill scene, turning their street rep into a form of cultural capital. On the Beaumont LGR side, there's less of a public musical footprint, perhaps because they valued anonymity or were overshadowed by Marley's output. Still, the "let's get rich" mantra itself is something of a cultural meme. In corners of East London, you can hear kids who weren't even born when Beaumont Estate was at its peak use the phrase half-jokingly or aspirationally. It symbolizes a certain hustler's ambition that has permeated youth culture, the idea of rising from the streets to riches by any means necessary. Unfortunately, in this context, it also glorified the drug trade. Community workers now try to counteract that narrative by promoting alternative ways to get rich, through education or legal entrepreneurship. But the allure of the gang lifestyle remains strong in the absence of other opportunities. The saga of the Beaumont crew, LGR, and the Marley Boys is a true crime story still unfolding. It's a story of poverty, pride, and profit, how a once close-knit group of friends from a housing estate turned into rivals spilling blood over drug turf. It's about the teenagers who are both perpetrators and prey, drawn into a world that promises fast money and respect, but often delivers prison or death. And it's about a community caught in the crossfire, where ordinary people have shown extraordinary resilience just to live their daily lives. As the camera pulls back from Leighton's streets, from the empty basketball courts where gang tags stain the walls, from the last wilted bouquet tied to a lamppost where a teenager fell, we're left with an uneasy quiet. The Beaumont crew may have got rich for a time, and the Marley Boys may have reigned in the drug trade, but at a devastating cost. In the end, the cycle of violence leaves behind far more loss than wealth. East London carries on, scarred but hopeful that the next generation will choose a different path, and that the true legacy of the Beaumont crew and LGR will be a lesson learned, rather than a trend followed.